Hey guys, did I ever tell you about that time where my buddy told me to use this new really cool camera right before I had a lecture that I was going to record and put out for Management 386, and the camera quality was so junky it came in and out the whole time that was terrible, but I didn't have time to redo it that day? This is that time. It won't happen again. Sorry.
What's up, guys? James here again, getting ready to jump into chapter 2, globalization, diversity, and ethics. We're going to hit each one of them. Again, these lectures are pretty small, little seminettes or lecturettes, if you will. So hit them lightly, try to focus on the most important stuff. Again, you kind of know the agenda here. What's the history a little bit? What do we really need to know? Where do people mess up, screw up, and then what if you want more? So the history on things like globalization, diversity, ethics, basically that's human history, right? Human adaptation over time. I think about the idea of resource constraints. I just finished reading a book called Astoria about the Pacific Northwest. Really cool. This guy, James Jacob Astor, he wants to make this global empire, right? So he's going to have trade ships come outside Oregon and Washington State, and they're going to trap a whole bunch of seals and beaver and take those over to what they call the Far East, so China and other areas, and sell them for a ton of money because they're rare and they're cool, and a ton of stuff as well, like goods from that area. Then they're going to circle around Africa and go up to Europe, and they're going to sell all the things that they got in China and make a ton of money and bring that stuff, bring it back to the United States. So just a big kind of circumnavigating the globe over and over, because you have things in Africa that you don't have in Canada, and you have things in Finland that you don't have in Chile. And so that's a big idea behind globalization. It used to be just trade, right? Now it's actually human talent is one of the biggest things that's offshored and onshored. So that forced some globalization. A really cool book on that is called The World is Flat by Malcolm Gladwell, if you want to check it out. The idea of diversity, I think, is pretty clear too. You needed broader cooperation. So we have a tribe and we have a tribe, and this tribe over here is coming to kill us both. But if we band together, even though we're different, value different things, different language, different customs, different religions, we might be able to defend ourselves, self-preservation. There you have it, multicultural teams coming together. So been around for a very long time. I mentioned in chapter 1 Hammurabi's Code, kind of one of the first, if you will, codes or laws or kind of codified ethics. That's because if we know how we do things in our tribe or our type of people, and you know how you do things in your type of people, when we get together, there's likely to be some problems. But if we can agree on a particular way of doing things, this is good or bad or right or wrong, it tends to facilitate flourishing a little bit more. So there's nothing really I can point to say that is the historical marker for diversity, ethics, globalization, whatever it is. It's just kind of human history. So what do we really need to know? Globalization. Oh, sorry, I got to go back. We'll do it this way. Globalization. The big idea here is kind of the four any's. What do I mean by that? Anytime, anywhere, any person, any place. It's not just four, there's actually a lot of any's, but that is if you are in Ellensburg, people think, I have a friend who's a mechanic in Ellensburg, and he's like, well, globalization doesn't really affect me other than maybe prices of goods. And I'm like, yeah, let's walk through this. Have you ever had a part you needed and you couldn't get it? Yeah. Did you know there's suppliers all over the world that do the same part? Let's check them out. Sure enough, he can save some money and get parts better because you can get it from anywhere on planet Earth. Or he says, I really, really need an accountant, and I can't find an accountant here in Ellensburg. Well, we found an accountant sitting on her back deck in West Virginia that was interested in part-time work, because you don't actually have to be here to be an accountant for a mechanic shop, a car shop, garage here in Ellensburg. So globalization is pretty rad. It's got some challenges, of course, but this is think bigger than just, gee, we're going to build cars in Mexico now because it's cheaper. That's not really what we mean by the paradigm or the framework of globalization. One of the biggest things that has been globalized and the earth has been flattened by is human talent. There's another term that you'll hear a bunch called VUCA. So that is volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. There's a concept from strategy theory, organizational theory, called The Liability of Foreignness. So if you've traveled a bunch, my wife and I have been to about 30, 35 different countries. Inevitably, you screw something up because you just don't know that's how they do it here, or this is what's important, in this particular place. A lot of times people show you grace if you show some humility, but you just know there's things that you don't know. And so globalization is really cool, but when you go over to Singapore, there are things that are done different. Or if you are in Northern Europe, there are things that you do different. So volatile. You can think political uncertainty, economic uncertainty. We're going to make a deal with these people who've been around for a long time, but what we don't know is the government is about to shut them down because of corruption. So that's kind of the liability of foreignness stuff. As you increase dependence between cultures and languages and people groups, obviously the complexity gets increased, and you can't therefore clearly predict. Here's step one, like project management. Here's step one. Here's step two. It's a lot more ambiguous. So we keep that in mind in terms of again, just an organizational behavior framework. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about diversity as we go through chapter 2. You can read it in the text, but really you're going to get a flavor of that in almost every business class. The big idea that I want you to know is there's a point-counterpoint that I think sums it up pretty well. Mathematician by the name of Scott Page basically built a logic or a mathematical proof that shows more diverse teams actually make better decisions. So the idea, if you have a whole bunch of really smart people, but they all only know the same large quantity of information, versus a whole bunch of smart people that know different types of information. This is the stuff we got since 5th grade, right? We all know the logic. That you'll have more information, and you put that together, ultimately you'll come up with a better conclusion, and then you can win. And you'll point to groups like Microsoft or Google, or whatever it is, and say, see, highly diverse teams and great success because of that diversity. The counterpoint was written to that. The title of that article was called Tidy Logic, Messy Reality. And if you get the play on words there, like mathematical logic, right? Like a good logic, yeah, that works in a lab, in a vacuum, but it's a lot messier reality, because when you bring people together with different value systems, different cultures, different languages, different life stories, then different traditions, then they're not automatically just going to go, gee, here's what I know, and just share it trustingly and be humble and serve each other. That's not naturally what happens. So when people say that diversity is good for bottom line performance, don't believe it. It's not true. It's not bad, though. Diversity can be really good for bottom line performance, but it has to be managed. There's 30 years of experiments in social psychology called, you can look into it, social identity theory, and that goes, I would be more likely to hang out with and trust and share information with and work with people who are like me. Like if you don't like the NFL, or if you don't just dream about walking a ridge line and crisp in the morning and through binoculars seeing, big elk running around you, well, then maybe we don't have the same values. And maybe we can't share the same stories, and maybe we can't connect, so it's going to be harder for us to overcome those diverse barriers to actually kind of work together, if you will. So anyway, there are not opposing views, but there's two ways of looking at it. A lot of times you'll hear words about like diversity and inclusion. What was the quote? Diversity is inviting everybody to the party. Inclusion is asking them to dance. So just because you have a diverse room full of people doesn't mean you're actually garnering any of the benefit of having a diverse group of people. So if that makes sense, a lot of stuff you can walk through in the text on your own. Sex discrimination is a fascinating concept. There are multiple ways to look at this. So other people have done that more justice to me. If you want to talk about it more, hit me up in the Zoom and we can walk through it. But in terms of changing of the workplace, the environment, obviously more and more women than the 1950s, if you will, in the workforce. It sits around 51% male, 49% female, plus or minus 1%. When we say more minorities, more ethnic minorities, here's like a better way to think of that. The fastest growing group, the last number of censuses. How do you say census plural? Is that censi? I don't even know what that is. Anyway, the demographic shift, the fastest growing group is actually multiracial. So people are saying that certain groups, the government under the Title VII laws in 1964 categorized people as basically white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Asian/Pacific Islander. I missed something. Indigenous, American Indian. That's a really, really limited framework. It's still used because that's the way the law was written, but that's a really limited framework. It's obviously much broader than that. And sometimes subcultures are even stronger differences than cultures. Meaning if you've been to Boston and you've been to Texas, you realize you've been to two different countries. They're two different cultures, and they may say, well, that's American. Yeah, but it's really different types of American. So subcultural differences are a lot of times even stronger than macro level cultural differences. What do I mean by that? People in Minnesota and southern Canada might be more similar to each other than someone from Minnesota and Tampa Bay. That's what I mean. Although the first group may be two different countries or nations, the second group has a stronger subcultural differential. Okay. The idea of a multicultural organization. So in your text, you're going to see kind of a set of levels of different types of organizations in how they approach diversity. And there are some stereotypes in there. Well, if it's a small town, blue collar town, they're going to be a little bit more discriminatory. But if it's, an urban environment, if it's a Seattle, if it's in LA, they'll be more progressive. It's not really that clear. But there are different types. A multicultural organization tries to do certain things, right? Diversity of participants in decision making, that is actually having say, not just being hired, but actually having a say in things, and also outward facing. So not just thinking how we do it here in the company, but how can our firm actually make a difference dealing with social oppression outside of our four walls. A few different stages of this. I can get my clicker to work here. So the very bottom level, you have exclusion. So this is just a category of a company. That is, they're really committed to saying this is dominance of one particular type of group. Those who are in that firm may not say, yes, we're totally exclusionary. But those who have been in and out, usually through turnover, may make that attribution. This is one of the importance of having exit interviews, right? If you have people, especially your 1 to 5 year employees, 1 to 3 year employees, if they're leaving, you really want to do exit interviews and figure out why. And then if you dive into the data, you get your analytics, your Excel or SPSS geeks looking at it, and they go, hey, we just happened to notice that of our 1 to 3 year hires, all the men stay, all the women leave. Okay, you got to figure out what's going on there. Or all the Hispanics stay and all the African Americans leave. You're going to want to figure it out. So the exit interviews can be really helpful because you won't know maybe if you are in an exclusion or a club type of organization. You're going to need other people to tell you. Compliance organization, this is like, we don't want to get in trouble. We'll do an affirmative action plan if we have to. We'll have the diversity training, but it'll be really dumb. We won't really care about it if we have to. We just want to make sure that we don't break the rules. This is kind of risk avoidant, minimize or mitigate legal risk. Next up is affirmative action. Like, we actually are trying to do things. We're trying to sniff out spots in the company where it's been disproportionately negatively affecting a particular group of people. And then finally, of course, you have redefining organization. How are we doing business? Are there cultural artifacts of how we are doing business that aren't actually fair or helpful to certain groups of people? So anyway, the bottom line is, it's not like there's good companies and bad companies, or there's racist companies and then Google. That's not what I mean at all. It's a continuum, and companies don't necessarily stay in one spot. It's dynamic. It's not static as the leadership changes over time. Arguably, if you want to get the value of diversity, I'm not talking about just class action lawsuits. I'm talking about managing people well, managing your company well. If you want to get the benefit of it, then you're going to be moving toward level 4, level 5, right? A redefining organization. I remember talking to an economist about this, about pay discrimination, and he was just going off and saying it just doesn't make business sense to only hire a limited group of people. And I'm in kind of HR employment law in my head. So I'm like, yeah, class action lawsuits, Title VII laws. And he goes, no, it's just supply and demand. Like if you say, here's the labor pool out there, and because I don't want to work with fill in the blank, I don't want to work with X group of people, you've just arbitrarily shrunk the labor pool of which you're willing to hire from. It's straight supply and demand. If you reduce the supply of labor you're willing to hire, you're just going to have to pay more for not any better talent. So, mathematical arguments, legal arguments, ethical arguments, historical arguments. Hopefully you get the idea. And I know this is common amongst a lot of classes, so that's a good thing. So what are some ways in which we can move toward kind of that level 5 redefining organization? Mentoring matters. It does matter, but it can't be like cookie cutter text box, like checkbox mentoring. Yes, of our 50 new employees this year, there were 6 Hispanic employees, and we've assigned them all a mentor. They meet once a year for lunch. Yeah, that's actually not mentorship at all. So there are good ways to do mentoring. A question comes up in this area a lot. Does the person who's doing the mentoring need to be like demographically like, okay, let's just take, I worked at Boeing for a while in engineering. There were not a lot of senior female engineers at Boeing for a number of reasons, arguably the major that was chosen back in the early 1980s. But so we'd hire young female engineers, get them plugged into what's called Society for Women Engineers. It's like, yes, we want these people to stay. That would be great. But they would look around and say, like, well, kind of what's my future in the company? I see that it's almost all men in senior management. So the question was, do we need to have it? Do we need to have the mentor be a female mentor as well? No. If you can, great. But if you're in a scenario where you've got, let's say, 60 senior managers, this is a big company, I guess it's not normal, but 60 senior managers, 3 of them are female. So what we're going to do is give them all the work, right, of mentoring new employees. It actually punishes them. So if it's voluntarily and they want to, great. But mentorship and rotational mentorship, because you connect with different people, tends to be more effective. Work family programs. This is kind of newer types of benefits. We'll talk about this as we move forward. We had a group. I'm going back to my Boeing days here. Sorry, going old school. We had a couple of they're called human factors engineers. They had to be like pilots, had a degree in psychology, and they had to have an engineering degree because they designed the cockpit. So they needed to know, like, this airplane is going to whatever, Vietnam Airlines, and this color means something different over there. So they just, everything the pilot touched, they would engineer. It was really cool. And they're really hard to find. Like, it's really hard to find talent. So we found a couple, and she said she denied the job, offered her a huge salary package. She denied the job because she said, I can't start at 7. You guys work like 7 to 3 or whatever it was, because I need to take my kids to school. And talked to the manager, like, well, does she need to start at 7? The manager's like, well, we've always started at 7. And you can imagine how that conversation went. Guess what, buddy? You're not starting at 7 anymore. Well, that's not fair. We're giving her special treatment. Oh, okay. Well, we could just lose the talent. You say you want to hire her. Everybody wants to hire her. She's number 1. You can just say, no, these are the rules. But if you just acknowledge that she wants to take her kids to school and she's going to work a bit later, it worked. They changed the policy, not just for that group, but for all the engineering groups there. So simple idea of how you attract and keep and retain talent just with better policies. Okay. Ethical issues. Ethics is a tough one to talk about. We're going to talk about it in terms of legally, but let me just pause here for a second. If you're a manager, you're actually setting an ethical tone, and sometimes you're even writing like codes of ethics. And I would just ask you, who do you think you are? You think you can just sit down and decide what's right and what's wrong? Like that's tough. Right? I've got friends who would say it's wrong to drink alcohol. And I have other friends that would say, I can't trust you and it's offensive if you won't have a whiskey with me. And then both of those people are on your team and you get to decide what's right and what's wrong, and you're going to upset everybody. So this is not, people try to make this squeaky clean that we're all going to be good people. Good means something different, culturally, subculturally, family history, traditions, whatever it is, trauma in your past. You'll have different view of what is and is not ethical. So this is not a squeaky clean topic. Usually when we talk about it in business schools, we'll point that out, but then we'll talk about things that we know are unethical, usually because they're connected to law, such as something like sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has always been around. Probably will always be around. Legally, there's two different forms of it. One of them is called hostile work environment, and one of them is called the quid pro quo. So the hostile work environment is probably well known. This is an unwanted advance. That's the first one. So if I'm walking down the hallway and you're like, dang, Avey, you look good today, and you catcalling me, I might be like, right, I lost a few pounds. I am looking good. That's not sexual harassment until it's unwanted. Then it might be, right? So this is tough to tell, which is why we encourage everybody, just don't make sexual advances. It's not that complicated. Then you'll never find out. That's the one. The other one is for hostile work environment is it needs to be pervasive, and it has to have some tangible effect, like I don't want to go to work, or it's affecting my job performance, or affecting my relationships at work, which affects my job performance, causing stress, stuff like that. That would be a hostile work environment. The other one is called quid pro quo. It's just a Latin term. It means this for that. Keep in mind that very rarely you'll have, let's just do a stereotypical example here, a male manager and a female subordinate, and the manager says, if you have sex with me this afternoon, well, then I'll give you a raise. Like that doesn't really happen. I mean, maybe it does, but it very rarely happens. I haven't heard of it. It usually goes like this. A manager says, hey, do you want to go out on a date Friday? Or however, maybe they connect on TikTok or Instagram, like however it's done today. I don't even know. I'm getting too old. But a manager just implying like I'm romantically interested in you, and now that person, because of the power differential, feels like I don't have a choice. I can't say no, so they're compelled into this. That would be a quid pro quo. This is why usually if I'm consulting with companies, give them a little dating policy. There's no what I call cross vertical dating. Like if you're peers and you want to date, keep it outside the office. That's great. But you never have a manager and a non-manager, executive manager, stuff like that. If they want to do that, somebody's got to change jobs. Too much risk. And perception of injustice by other employees, which causes other problems. When there is a history of sexual harassment, you got to pry a little deeper, right? You got to say, do we have bad policies? Are we not following up on complaints? Are we hiring the wrong people? Are we modeling the wrong behavior? One of them is you want to make it generally easy to report sexual harassment violations, right? You don't want to necessarily incentivize it, right? We're going to give a gift card to everybody who feels like they've been sexually harassed. Like I don't mean incentivize it, but I do mean like get the roadblocks out of the way where someone says, look, I'm uncomfortable. It's causing a problem at work. And if I say something, I know I'm going to be seen as that person. I'm going to be seen as the victim. I'm going to be seen as the weak one, or the one that couldn't hack it, couldn't handle a little trash talk. I couldn't do it. So you know what? Screw it. I'm not going to say anything. If there's a way to get that person to be more free, less cumbersome, right? To be able to report it to somebody they trust. Sometimes people do, like an anonymous hotline, stuff like that. But if that's you at work right now, I'll tell you this, bear in mind, being like a past HR person, if you tell me there's sexual harassment, I can't not do anything, right? At that point, I must respond. I must do an investigation. And if you say, hey, I just wanted to tell you this, but I don't want you to do anything, I'll be honest with you, I have to do something. I can make it as low key as possible. I can protect you as much as possible. But if it's happening, not only morally, ethically, but also legally, the person does need to respond. So if you're in that scenario, feel free to give me a call, and we can walk through some better ways to do it. Okay, how are we responding to this? I think every manager knows this. Every manager, if you don't have an HR person when you work, fine. Every manager is an HR person. Remember, HR is the practical application or organizational behavior theory. So the science is in organizational behavior. The application is in human resource management. That's why these classes tie together so well. So if that's you, and you know this, if you're a manager, you don't have an HR person, heads up, you are the HR person. You're responsible, legally responsible, to act as an agent on behalf of the company. So if somebody says something, you gotta like tune your ear to it. Somebody says, "Man, it's really awkward how that guy's always leaning over the desk." If the person's leaning over the desk and just kind of leering and checking out someone's body, that's a complaint. You now knew or should have known as a manager, and you need to take action. If you don't, that's on you, right? This is one of the most frequent frequent mistakes that people do, is they dismiss stuff, or they say, "Oh, it's just, that's just kids being kids," or they'll work it out, or whatever it is. You gotta take action if there's a complaint, and the complaint is not always going to be like, "Here's the form to fill out." It can be just a comment to you as a manager. Okay, privacy issues. Stuff is fun. Drug testing just shifted in Washington State. I don't think any of my students are aware that marijuana is now illegal in Washington State, but some other people, of course, might know that. So that threw a wrench into things, right? You have this federally controlled, substance, and you have Washington State saying, "No, recreationally, go for it," and you have managers in between saying, "Well, we used to drug test. Can we drug test now?" As a recent law passed in Washington State, it said for non-safety sensitive positions, no, you cannot test for marijuana. Well, practically, I'll just tell you that all the drug tests still test for marijuana. So what the law really means is you cannot use that data in making a selection. So in the past, I'd say, is there cocaine? Is there meth? Is there whatever in this person's system? Amphetamines? Is there THC? Right, which is in marijuana. And now I get the same report on employees. I just can't use the whether there is or is not THC in their biological system as a data. Does discrimination still happen there? I don't know, probably. But the drug testing issue, the computer technology, the privacy stuff, usually we go down to magnitude of consequences. It's kind of the ethical framework in which managers would decide, when am I going to take that person's computer and go into it? Okay. If you think they're spending too much time on solitaire, you're probably not going to take, or on Instagram, you're probably not going to take their computer and go through it. If they work R&D, right, for the F-22 Raptor, right, this multi-billion-dollar military project, and you think they're on Instagram at work, you're taking the computer, and you're investigating, you're figuring out what's going on, okay? You think your accountant might be smoking too much weed on the weekends, or you're probably not going to fire them right away. That person's a pilot. It's different now. They drive a forklift, truck driver, it's different now, right? So what we think of is magnitude of consequences. Most people, if you hire them and you start cracking into their computers and their voicemail and stuff because you don't trust them, they're going to leave. So it's loss of talent, right? Loss of talent is a bummer. People getting hurt is a bigger bummer. So again, magnitude of consequences. Where do people screw up these topics of like globalization, diversity, and ethics? Yeah, pretty much everywhere. You can go to any news site, and on any given day, you'll find something there. Discrimination is a popular one, right? You see it on the news all the time. So yeah, that's bad, and that has consequences. One of the biggest consequences is not a lawsuit; it's the loss of human capital, loss of reputation, ability to attract good human talent, stuff like that. There is lawsuits if you break things ethically. You can go to jail. But I wanted to add this thing at the end, what I called career-ending honest mistakes. I remember I hired a guy once who came up from Seal Beach, California, and the company I was working for had a policy of just no guns anywhere on the premises. And so he comes to work, and what was it like transferred up to Washington? What was it like down at Seal Beach? Like, kind of, what'd you learn? And they go, this is kind of freaky. I always packed a gun. I never used it, never even took it out. But early on, my dad was like, just carry a gun around, just, to protect yourself. I said, okay. Sat in the glove box forever. Well, somebody overheard the conversation and said, I think he has a gun in his glove box, right? So then they call me as the HR person. So I call security because I don't know this guy, right? So I call security. I hired him. I thought he was cool, but it was a weird scenario. So security's kind of waiting outside the door, and I was like, hey, we just kind of overheard this. Is that true? And he's like, yeah, I always have. Like, I never taken it out. It's not even loaded. It's just there, and I don't even know why I have it anymore. Where did you park? Yeah, we can go out there and I can get it for you. No. Where did you park? We literally go to the window. There's a parking lot that's non-employee property and a parking lot that's employee property. He parked on employee property. Had to fire him. You go, well, that's not fair. He didn't know. He wasn't in the bag. Yeah, I know. But the next person who I don't fire, because when you start making those precedent decisions, this is how we deal with stuff if somebody brings a gun to work. And you say, well, Avey, that was a totally different scenario. I agree 100%. The lawyers did not care. They're like, we can't risk it. The next person comes in and they say, wait, what? There was a guy there that had a gun and you didn't do anything? And now this disaster has happened? You knew or should have known. So that's an example. And sexual harassment is actually another common one. Somebody, I think she likes me. It takes someone with a little bit of emotional intelligence to pull the person aside and say, dude, she does not like you. Stop talking to her. She's being kind. Leave her alone. Career-ending honest mistakes. Because if you get fired, especially the more mature you are in your career, 35, 40 years old, if you get fired for something like that, it's going to be tough to pick up the pieces in the next place. Follows with you. So be careful. Be wise. If you want more information on this topic, I do like this book. I think it's Malcolm Gladwell, The World is Flat. On diversity, Scott Page, it's the journal is called The Academy of Management Perspectives. I just like the very scientific, like respectful to each other, but point counterpoint, you know what that is? It's like I'm going to make my point and then you get to provide your counterpoint to it. And it's not like a debate that goes back and forth, but us as the consumers of the science get to go, okay, that's well-founded. Oh, snap. Okay, that's also well-founded. So it allows us to kind of operate in a bit of a paradox. So that's what we got for chapter 2.
Hey guys, did I ever tell you about that time where my buddy told me to use this new really cool camera right before I had a lecture that I was going to record and put out for Management 386, and the camera quality was so junky, it came in and out the whole time. That was terrible, but I didn't have time to redo it that day. This is that time. It won't happen again. Sorry.